Okay, good. I would like to call to order the regular board meeting of the Othello School District Board of Directors. We will begin the meeting tonight with the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'd like to welcome all our guests tonight. I want to thank you all for taking time to be with us here. All of us that are on the Zoom meeting, those that are watching live on YouTube, thank you. Full disclosure again, as I have for longer than I'd like to, we will hopefully get through this without any technical difficulty. If we do, please bear with us. But thank you nonetheless. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us as you hear us discuss our business tonight. Having said that and moving on, I will entertain a motion for the approval of tonight's agenda.
I will
make the motion.
Agenda.
Okay, I'll second it then.
We have a motion by Director Stevenson and a second by Director Johnson. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Mike, you're muted. Mike, you're muted.
Sorry, Jen. There we go again with those technical difficulties. Appreciate the patience, guys. We do have two members of the community that would like to give public comment tonight. I'd just like to remind them, first of all, I'd like to thank them. At the same time, remind them of what our rules are for public comment. Nonetheless, it is important that you state your comment tonight, and the proper person or entity will respond to your discussion tonight. So I believe our first public comment comes from John Erickson. So John, go ahead.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. I wasn't sure if I was unmuted. Hey, I had two questions, and would like to, and I'm not sure if the board's going to answer these or release an answer, but I wanted to know what the board's stance on OSPI's recommendation that's been rumored out there in their writings of opening schools back up to children of color prior to anybody else, and their subversion of equity and their standards for equity. And I was wondering if the board had a stance on that, or if Dr. Hurst had a stance on that in the opening up.
Hey, John, this is Lindsay Prouse. I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear your question. Would you mind repeating that? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah, I had just wondered what the board's stance or Othello School District stance was in OSPI's recommendations of opening school to children of color prior to any others, as the recommendation in the opening back up of our school districts throughout the state. I wanted to know what Othello School District thought of that, and if that's something we are going to entertain or not.
Okay, Dr. Hurst will research that a bit and get you an answer, John. I know it's been brought to my attention by a few people in the community. I actually referred to page 32 of their manual where that paragraph is, or that statement is listed. But Dr. Hurst will be the one that gets back to you with an answer to that question. You said there was another one?
You know, Mr. President, that'll be fine. If Dr. and the second question would have pertained to any responses, I'll yield the floor back to you guys. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you. Rest assured, someone will communicate with you. I believe we have Nikki Sams also, who is going to do some public comment tonight. Nikki, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I work at Hiawatha, and I'm a second grade teacher. I first just want to thank everyone in the district and the school board who are working endlessly and tirelessly to get the students and teachers back into the classroom 100% or just at least back, because we all know that kids need to be back. And so I really appreciate all that you're doing for us. So thank you on that. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
just want to make sure. Okay. My question is, and more of a question, not a comment, but has our school district looked at neighboring districts to see what they're doing to get our students back K-6 100% into the classroom?
Hi, Nikki. This is Dr. Hurst.
Hi.
Hi. We actually have a superintendent's group from ESD 123 that meets on a weekly basis. One of the priorities of that meeting is to do a round robin to see what each school district is doing for their kids for their reentry plan. There's also a bi-monthly meeting that happens with our state superintendent, Chris Reckdahl. And a lot of guidance comes down from the state, but there is a lot of collaboration that happens around the state with state superintendents, district superintendents, about what they're doing. So to answer your question, absolutely, yes, there's a lot of collaboration around what each school site is doing or each district is doing in bringing their kids back. As a matter of fact, I just had a meeting today with regional superintendents from ESD 123. I had the opportunity to present our plan, our draft of a plan of what we're doing. And typically in those meetings, Nikki, superintendents have the opportunity to share what they're doing. There's a lot of collaboration, a lot of sharing of resources across the state, not just within our own region. So absolutely that's happening.
Okay, so can I add one little tiny piece of information to that then? Or can I add one more comment to that?
Go ahead.
Okay. I don't know what the rules are. I'm sorry. I guess my only comment on that is I know like there's a neighboring district that is working on getting they're trying to get their students back 100%. And I don't want to say what district it is because I'm not sure if I'm really supposed to share that information, but they're like utilizing all the resources and all the people in their building to try to get their K-6 students back at least 80%. And so I didn't know if you were aware of that. It sounds like that you are. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So thank you for listening to my comment.
No, thank you, Nikki. Appreciate your public comment tonight. Thank you for that.
Okay.
All right, moving on to item B2, board member discussion. First bullet is the legislative report. Director Stevenson, don't know if we have a report tonight.
I do have a little bit. So been working with the state resolution committee for WASDA, Washington School. Oh shoot, what does it stand for? Washington State School Directors Association is what WASDA stands for, that we're members of. And we're still working on trying to work out the kinks and all of the details for the General Assembly, where we vote on what the upcoming legislative issues are that all of the school board members throughout the state want to have as a huge issue for WASDA to go forward with to next year's legislative session. And any enduring, long-lasting topics that we either need to modify or update or those kinds of things. So still working towards getting those worked out, those kinks and things. I am going to have another meeting this week with them, like online. So, but that is very important. I think I've talked about those before, and that we will have access, and we'll need to work out once they have the specifics and the details for that. We as a board, I think we'll need to have a conversation about how do we want to attend that? Do we want to attend that all in the same room in the boardroom, or depending upon what phase we're in, do we want to attend that just from our homes? Those are big deal things that that we'll be going forward with. And so we'll just need to make sure that we all ready to have those conversations about where and how it's going to be best suiting for them. So that's my report.
All right. Just, is it in Spokane this year or is it on the other side?
It's not. It is
Oh.
online.
Yeah.
But I know that I think you're actually might be referring to the annual
Yeah.
conference
Yes.
is actually in Spokane, and we could do it in person or online or a mix of both. Even if we're uncomfortable with something, we can run up to our room and do that online or something along those lines. Or if there's no room or there's too many people in the room, but you still wanted to see that session. So there's a lot of different options that way. And so that is, they have the dates for that and stuff. That I'm grateful that they're making that as accessible as possible for everyone, no matter where they live in our state.
Very good. Thank you for
Are
that.
you talking about the WASD conference itself is in Spokane this year and not Bellevue?
Yes, so they alternate every other year. It's at 2 locations. They keep them at those specific 2 locations, Spokane, Bellevue. It's always at the same hotel, and it's just every other year. This year is Spokane.
Very good.
Said you do not have the dates for that yet, or you do?
It's the weekend right before Thanksgiving. Let me pull that up so I can give you that. November 18th through the 21st is WASDA conference.
Thank you.
And General Assembly is what I was talking about, where we, as WASDA members, vote for our policies for the Legislative Assembly and legislative agenda. And that is Friday, September 25th is what's called General Assembly. So those are 2 days those are 2 dates that we'll want to make sure that we have on our calendars and try to keep open. Both are really valuable and great information.
All right. Thanks for that, Jen. Our board self-assessment to the last meeting was included there. Again, let's hold ourselves accountable and do those after our meeting, get those turned in. Third bullet on the board member discussion. Jen, I know you've had some conversations with the city and you were going to fill us in on perhaps a joint meeting, so go ahead.
So I had a conversation after our last board meeting. We talked about wanting to have joint meetings periodically with other elected officials and groups in our community. I went and spoke with the mayor about the idea of city council and school board meeting together as a joint meeting. We came up with some really great ideas and concepts. I did listen to their last city council meeting, and I don't know if it was they failed to bring it up or what, but we came up with what our purpose was: to unify a collective voice in Olympia and federally, and advise each other of collective focus and plans, because we want them to know what our goals long-term are, or even short-term, like next 2 or 3 years, and vice versa, so that we can try to help each other. We have the same tax base and all kinds of things. He had suggested joint meetings once a quarter, and then we set up very specific ground rules. And together we came up with, we would like to have a date to meet by August 1st. I had suggested before school starts. And so I'm not quite sure. I had also sent an email to Mayor Logan and to follow up and said, hey, we're having this meeting tonight. I'd really like to be able to bring a few dates in mind, because we talked about a couple of dates, but I don't know if it was shared publicly or privately with the rest of city council. It would obviously have to be an open public meeting. Who runs those meetings? That's kind of the ground rules that we were talking about. What exactly is our purpose, so that it's just very clear both to community and ourselves what we're doing there. And again, like whether we do it by Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever, it will be more difficult to do it with the current OPMA, Open Public Meetings Act rules with that we can't be in the same room. But I'd rather at least start something than just wait until we can meet in person, which I think for many of us feels like will never happen again. So any questions or any other, he did suggest lots of other options of other groups. And I said, let's just start small. Let's start with our group and your group before we get a bunch of other groups involved, and let's start there. So.
Any other input from any of the board members on the idea?
Being on the other side of the table here, serving my time on council, I think it would be very helpful to work together. There's a lot of different things, even the growth of the school, working together with the city on our future plans, and working with the city for their plans of what the city should look like in the future as for growth in areas. It's a very good positive. And it would be just be a general good relationship to have. Anyway.
Yeah, so if you get some more concrete information on dates, Jen, just keep us abreast of what's going on, and let's make this happen. Let's worst case, have an initial meeting to set parameters, like you were saying, topics of discussion, things of that nature. I think it'd be a great collaborative effort in both of our parts, both councils, to act together on things that are just going to benefit everybody in this community. So yeah, let's keep in touch with that. It's not on our agenda tonight, but I want to read a thank you card that was sent from Shea Rose Parish. It says, "School Board, I just wanted to say thank you for the scholarship. It means a lot to me to have your support as I head to WSU this fall. Again, thank you so much, Shea Parish." I just wanted to make sure all board members knew that we had received that. Congratulations, Shea, if you're listening, or if somebody can tell her, we appreciate her note, her card. Thank you very much for that. Moving on, or anything else that's not on our agenda that somebody wants to discuss? I see some no's. Student representative reports. Elise or Lauren, the floor is yours if either of you has comment tonight.
Jen, should we ask our questions now, or when should we do that?
If they're specifically referring to the presentation about the opening schools in the fall, I would suggest waiting until the presentation, and then you can just jump in with all the rest of us board members asking those questions. If you have something else, then I would suggest now.
Okay, I do have a couple questions for later, but for now, I just wanted to say, I think, and I've asked a couple of my friends about this situation, but I think that our biggest thing is, I don't think anyone cares how we go back in the fall, but everyone just wants to go back to school, no matter what that means. And I just wanted to say that to the board and to anyone to whom it might concern. That's all I had to say for now.
Lauren, are you?
Hi, yeah. I agree 100%. I do have a couple questions for the presentation and some of the things that will be shared later on, but I do agree that I am just itching to get back into the classrooms.
All right, thank you very much, both of you, for your input tonight. Moving on to item C1. I will entertain a motion to approve required approvals tonight.
I will make that motion.
Okay,
I will second.
Motion by Director Johnson and a second by Director Prowse. Any discussion? All in favor, aye? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Moving on to item C2, I will entertain a motion for early accounts payable to Johnson Glass.
I move we approve the accounts payable for Johnson's Glass.
We have a motion by Director Stevenson. Can I get a second? Okay, we have a second by Director Schutte. Any discussion? All in favor, aye? Aye.
Aye.
Any against?
I will have to abstain from this vote.
Okay,
due to-
motion carries 4-0 with one abstention. Okay. Moving on to item C3, which is, I think, a focal point of tonight's meeting. I will let Chris take the mic or the computer or whatever it is tonight to give us information that we have been waiting for some time. To the public, I want to questions will be made by board members tonight. Again, this is a draft. We will have some discussion.
We're getting a lot of feedback. I see that Chris is now muted, but that was super echoey. Can you start over, Mike?
Okay. I was just mentioning that it is time for the focal point of our meeting tonight. And to the community members that are listening, we will, the board have questions that are going to be asked. This is a draft of what is being proposed tonight. So I appreciate that we pay close attention to the presentation tonight. Dr. Hurst.
I'd like to say good evening to the board of directors and also the public, anyone who's listening. We do have the teaching and learning team present, Pete Perez and John Wiseman, who's going to lead us through a draft of the plan. We encourage the board of directors, I'm sure that you already have your questions ready, but also as we're going through, it would be helpful for us if you ask probing questions, because it'll allow us to go back and continue to refine. And then the goal is to bring this back to the board of directors on July the 24th for consideration for approval. I would like to just share before we begin, Mr. Erickson did ask a question about the district's stance on a document that was put out by OSPI. I do have that document, so if Mr. Erickson is still listening or anyone else, the document that's being referred to in part on page 32 says schools may identify which student groups face the largest opportunity gaps and consider bringing some students back first as a way to prevent those gaps from widening. These groups include students with disabilities, English learners, students experiencing homelessness, students experiencing poverty, students of color, and other students facing opportunity gaps identified in the district's data. So just wanted to clarify, the message does not just simply point out students of color, and actually refers to all student groups that are underperforming or low performing. What I will share with you is there have been no conversations in our district about a measured approach, meaning bringing in certain student groups first. So our official stance is that we're working hard to bring all students back at the same time, safely, in the best manner. So that is the district's official stance, bringing all students back as safe as we can. There is no measured approach. So Mr. Erickson, if you're listening, that is the district's official stance. With that, I will turn this over to Pete and to John to lead us through the draft of the reentry plan.
Before you start, I'm sorry, you said that we'll be making a decision on July 24th. It's actually the 27th. I just don't want people looking for something on the 24th when the plan was the 27th to make an official decision.
Jen, could you start again? I'm having trouble. I got to remember to unmute my computer.
So Dr. Hurst said that there will be a decision made on July 24th. I just want to be clear, it's actually the 27th. I just don't want people looking for something on the 24th and it not coming out until 3 days later. So that's our next board meeting is the 27th.
Thank you, Jen. Yes, I stand corrected. So we'll turn it over to you, Pete.
All right, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to meet with the board and the community that's watching this evening. I also appreciated the comments from Elise and Lauren about their hopefulness and desire to get back to schools. It's the message I've heard consistently from students. It's also what I'm hearing from teachers and administrators. Everybody wants to get back to our campuses. And so what we want to talk about tonight is how can we approach that goal in the most appropriate way that keeps our students and our staff safe. I also think it's a nice opportunity in our community to recognize the importance of public education, not only in our community, but in our state and across the country. And it's exciting to hear how valued folks that do this work and choose this as a career. I hope that they have sensed that over the last several months because it's really good work that we get to do. Next slide, please, Thalia. I just wanted to highlight here that for the community and for the board that our desire is to open up in the least restrictive environment that we can. We know that that's all doors open, every kid comes back, we're back into a regular mode of operation. But we also know that in partnership with local health authorities, regional experts, and guidance from OSPI and the governor's office, that there's some guidelines that we're obligated to consider and to develop our plan based around those guidelines. And that's what you're here tonight. We did have an opportunity on Friday afternoon to meet with Karen Potts from Adams County Health. What we've tried to do is listen to what's happening across the region and across the state, but also to be mindful of local context. And Karen has been very helpful in reviewing our plan and has demonstrated a willingness and offered to continue to support us as we refine it along the way. I also wanted to highlight the partnership that we've had with OEA and PSE and our teaching staff through the building principals. The leadership teams at the schools have done a lot of thinking around this complicated problem that we're all dealing with. It's been a collaborative process, and I won't say that we've reached consensus on every issue or every item, and it's presented tonight as a draft because we know there are more conversations that need to be had around this issue. But what we're going to share with you tonight is our current reality, what we think is a pretty pragmatic and common sense approach to the issue. And first and foremost on our minds is the health and safety of the students and staff. And next slide, please. You're going to hear also what we heard from our community, that we had a really high rate of return on the survey that we sent out in comparison to surveys we've sent out in the past. And so John is going to tell you a little bit about what we heard from our community related to the reopening of schools.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. So we had a fairly high response rate for this, with just over 630 people that responded to this survey. And what you're seeing here is one of the essential questions that was asked was, will you enroll your child if we're able to reopen in the fall following CDC guidelines? And you see that over half of the respondents, 56%, said, yes, I'm comfortable with sending my child back to school. But you also see that we have nearly 45% that were either unsure or responded as no. What was interesting with that is that there are very differing reasons why they're either unsure or at this point not comfortable sending their child back. It's either because that they feel like it's not safe enough, that there's still some concerns for the health of their child, and so they don't feel quite comfortable yet sending their child back, or it's the complete opposite, that they feel the school's going to reopen in too restrictive of an environment, that they don't want their child wearing masks, or they don't believe in only having part of the students enroll. And so this is an interesting dynamic that we're certainly trying to be respectful of and be cautious as we approach. Talia, can we see the next slide? These are just of many comments that were made, just highlighting just a handful of them, just showing kind of the differences in perspective, with the top being voices that are more along the lines of that, let's get open, let's get back. You know, can we fully come back to school in a traditional manner? And then the second half, the last three comments there, or on the other side of the coin, of expressing either concerns or saying, yeah, we want to go back, but we don't think it's quite safe enough yet. So just some examples that, of our community respondents. Talia, the next slide. One of the pieces that, or the questions that was asked was, if we do come back, or as we open up in the fall, what sort of model can you support? And if we look on the left side, 100% online learning until we can fully reopen. That was one of the options. Just 41% said that's something that they could support. The middle option, continuing with online learning and student packets, as we did at the close of this past school year, 45% could support that. And the greatest support was around opening in a blended model, where we have part of the students attending school physically at a time. And that's something that with 64% showed the strongest support for, and something that Pete's going to go into further about what a blended model is and how that might look.
As we get into the bulk of the presentation and the content here that lives in the next several slides, it would be really helpful along the way, not only to capture the questions from the board representatives, but perhaps in the moment, if you do have a question for John or myself, that we certainly can pause during the presentation and entertain those, so that it becomes a conversation as opposed to sort of a sit and get. Going back, go ahead.
I'm sorry. If anybody else is on the Zoom call, if they can mute unless they're the presenter. It's just there's a little bit of background noise coming in and it makes it difficult for everybody to hear. That is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
All right. In relation to the concept around least restrictive environment, we know that a traditional school model, we've been doing that for several years in the Othello School District. So we know how to do that. Certainly, if we came back in that model face-to-face for all students every day, whatever the status is in our county related to social distancing and the health requirements, that we would be prepared to address. If we're in an online model like we were in the spring, we've been asked by the state and by the community to certainly do that in a more coherent way. I think our teachers gave an excellent effort. Our students gave an excellent effort. But it was in response to a crisis, and we know that if we're asked to do it again, we'd be able to do it better. Whatever scenario we end up in, we know we're going to have to do the work and prep for them. So in getting at this blended model, we're essentially preparing for a pivot to online if we're forced that direction, or back to our traditional model. Now, specifically related to the blended model and this rotation schedule, it's to address one of the biggest issues that we had in the spring, and that was the lack of in-person, face-to-face interaction between teachers and students. I would hope that we would all agree that the best chance for all of our students is they get to interact consistently with a high-quality teacher. And we have a lot of high-quality teachers in Othello, and the opportunity for our kids to interact with them makes the biggest difference. So this blended model gives us that opportunity on a more consistent basis. It also, in a blended opportunity, would help us overcome the constraints that are required through social distancing protocols. So if we come back in what we've identified as a 50% capacity K-12 day to day, that we would be able to meet those standards. And then on the days when students aren't in school, or an afternoon or morning in the AM/PM scenario, students would still be expected to follow the traditional school day as much as possible with online activities. And so that's where that online blended approach comes into play. Certainly some of the challenges with this model is that there is some risk of exposure or transmission. That's the kind of terminology that we've interacted with the health professionals have told us. This is what you need to be aware of, that you're not going to eliminate risk or limit it as much as you would in an online model. Another challenge is that students are still going to spend a significant amount of time learning remotely in the blended model. And we're also quite aware that childcare is going to be a major challenge, not only for the families in our community, but our employees directly. And that's true, I think, across the state and across the country. So we're aware of those factors, and it's presented in a draft format so that we can continue to get feedback from the board and the community and our local associations to come up with the best plan possible. But where we're at today and what we're going to talk about is a blended model a 50-50 model. Any
Jen,
questions?
did you have a question?
I'm sorry, what did you say, me?
Yeah.
Okay, so can you explain the reasoning why some students, why the K-8 students would have a morning and an afternoon concept, but then the high school students would have an on day and an off day, disrupting families? Can you talk about the background as to why? That's my first question here.
Yeah, you bet. And we'll get into some of the concepts and the models in slides moving forward, but it's helpful to hear it multiple times and to come back to it. The AM/PM rationale, K-8, was to work to keep those student groups and those families together. It was important to our educators at that level that they had consistent daily contact with students. That was one of the filters that they used. It was also important to them logistically when we think about our meal service. We did an outstanding job. Our food service and transportation folks did a tremendous job in providing meals for kids throughout the closure. And this model would support that activity. We'd be able to continue to offer that. Now, the constraints at the high school, as it relates to the schedule, perhaps I'll push that aside till we get there. But I want to let you know that there are going to be options for families at the secondary level to also select an AM/PM model if it works for them and is a requirement. And much like we do with our attendance appeals, we would want to ask folks to let us know, here's my issue, here's why I need support in this area. And the schedule could be set up in such a way that some of our secondary students could access the AM/PM model.
You mean some of the high school students could have an AM and a PM? Is that what you're
Correct.
saying?
Yes.
Okay. And then would the district make it possible so that all children within that family are on the same schedule?
Yeah. So related to transportation, this will come out again in the next few slides. But what we've done is Marion Shade, our director of transportation, and her staff, along with collaboration with the building principals, they've landed on this country and city kid model. So if you live within the city limits and you don't ride a bus, you're going to be an AM kid. If you live out in the country and you ride a bus, or your parents bring you in, you're going to be a PM kid. So families would be grouped together.
Okay.
Next slide, please, Dalia.
So just to be 100% clear, Pete, because I've had several families ask me about this. If you are in the same family and your last name is Johnson, your kids, whether they're in high school, middle school, or elementary school, will be on the same schedule. So they will go to school. Let's say they live in the country on Bench Road, they're at the golf course. Mm-hmm. They will all go to school in the PM session together.
That's true for the K-8 students. If the family had a high school student that was helping with childcare in the AM session, our high school staff has worked really hard. The other compounding factor at the high school is the need to accrue credits, and just the scale of that school makes it more challenging. So we haven't set it up where we're in a current model where we could have run an AM/PM at the secondary level. What we're saying is we believe we can accommodate those families that you just described who would request for their secondary student, I need to have this AM/PM structure. And we have some ability to handle those requests. But that would have to be requested in the current model at the secondary level.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Just for clarification, when you say secondary model, you mean high school?
I am just 9-12, sorry. Yep.
Okay, yes, thank you. Clear mud is I'm trying to make it, sorry.
Yes. Next slide, please. Oh. Was that a question from the board or a community?
I think that's a community member that's not on mute.
Okay.
But we might be hearing background from.
Moving forward, we're going to talk now about health and safety precautions. And we have used a framework from the Hanover Research Group, and they've really identified 3 key areas around health and safety. So we're going to talk through some of our recommendations for universal health guidelines, social distancing, and personal protective equipment that we're going to provide for our students and staff. Next slide, please, Dalia. So the model that we've asked our leadership teams, our teacher leaders and other groups to consider are, initially we started out with all the questions that I'm certainly the board members get bombarded with and educators get bombarded with every day to consider in considering reopening. So folks really want to know how we're going to keep rooms clean. How are you going to do all these temperature checks? What about masks? Those kinds of things. How are you going to handle social distancing? So we wanted to address a couple of those issues and certainly know that these are sort of the big ideas and the way we're thinking about the work, and would be able to provide additional clarity on specific ones if requested. But related to the rooms themselves, we know that we're going to have to clean and sanitize desks and chairs and high touch areas like door handles and those kinds of things. There would be required cleaning between the AM, PM and the AB classes. So that would be K-12. And what we're doing right now is we're working with OEA and PSE to talk about the support structures that would need to be in place so that our teachers and paras and students, everybody at the campus could be involved in a way to keep the campus clean. We know that it's too big a lift to ask a single custodian in a 500 student elementary school that only has 250 kids in it to be responsible for all of the cleaning. So we're working on safety protocols and the kinds of materials and resources that would be safe for students and staff. So you think about things like water, soap and water, and those kinds of things that would be appropriate in your home for a child to use, or another adult who might not be trained in particular chemicals that we use in our schools. It will really be that kind of blended approach, all hands on deck. And when you think about how schools work, we typically have jobs that we assign students at the end of the day as a method of teaching responsibility and helpfulness and those kinds of things. So when you think about the kids who pass out the paper or help clean up the floor at the end of the day or put the chairs up, we're looking at those kinds of models. That's what we're hearing from other communities and other educators. And so those are the kinds of things that we're thinking through. But we certainly will have a robust cleaning protocol for each of our classrooms and each of our areas at the school site. Related to social distancing, that's where we landed on the 50% capacity model. We know that the approximate size of classrooms in our school district. We talk about it a lot when we're considering funding and building schools. So we're quite familiar with that. We've partnered really closely with Greg Foltz, our safety director, and our building principals to look at our current facilities and talk about how many kids we can put safely in a classroom based on current guidance from the health department. We also expect that in keeping those spaces apart, that we'll use visual cues to remind students and staff of expectations. So you can imagine if you've been in a supermarket in the last month or so, those kinds of items that you see on floors, up at eye level, those kind of reminders will be pretty consistent in our facilities. We also will set up classrooms to monitor distance between students. So we don't expect that we would be taking a bunch of desks out of classrooms. Those desks and tables could possibly be used as physical barriers and reminders and visual cues for students to maintain their distance. Some of the other protocols we're putting in place are related to start and end times. Not only for buildings, but you can imagine at the high school level when there's a transition between classes. Do we want 300 students in the senior hall? Probably not. So thinking about how to stagger those ending times, how to use specific routes to have kids walk that direction, and just putting those practices in place. I'm confident that our kids can do it. And I heard from Elise and Lauren earlier that if we say, hey, here's some of the protocols that we need to put in place, but it means we can go back to school, I'm rather confident that they'll be able to lead other students in that format. We also know that having half the students on school grounds at a time is it's gonna cause some, it's gonna really feel different for kids in school. And one of the other experiences that's gonna be adjusted is large school events. So when you think about school assemblies, concerts, and those kinds of activities, they would be on pause until we're giving clearance from the health department to move forward with those sorts of large group activities.
Pete, hey, this is Mike.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't know if this is the appropriate time for this question. I know I was approached by several staff that their question was they have underlying conditions that are conducive to COVID. And I know this is a draft and you may not have answers to specifics as to if they'd be a little more isolated, if they'd have extra PPE, if there's accommodations going to be made in the case that there are those folks that potentially may, for their safety, not going to want to return.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I know that what we're really talking about today might feel specific and talks about the changes that we're suggesting for our campuses, but we also know it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So as I think a responsible employer, we would have to say, well, let's hear about your situation. I would hope that they're engaging in conversations with their principals, who we would want to advocate for those folks. We've talked a little bit about this in the area of special education, where students might struggle with their own PPE. And so there are some models being implemented right now in our summer school that we have on a small scale, where folks are testing out shields and different covers and those kinds of things. So absolutely going to have flexibility and responsiveness to any reasonable accommodation that is requested by an employee. So we're absolutely in a position to do that.
Thank you.
You know, I think that was one of the largest questions that was proposed to me too. I've got a great big list, and most of them are from staff. But we've also got, there was 18.8% of parents said no, that they wouldn't send their kids to school. And I know we're going to have some of those out there. Is it possible that some of these teachers that are more compromised could do more online instruction with possibly these kids that could do online, where we want to protect their safety, where we possibly have students that are more compromised too, that we can work these two together somehow?
Yeah, I think that idea about working them together is an excellent suggestion. What we've learned over the last several months is that, at least here locally, our staff and students and families are certainly willing to be flexible. And if we got to a point where 20% of our students weren't going to show up and we had to pivot online, I think we'd want to really strongly consider how do we shift some of our manpower and human resources that way, fully understanding that it would be a reassignment or a change in sort of the kind of work, but it would make sense. Again, we talked about a pragmatic approach early on, that if we had those individuals or employees who would self-select into that kind of work, certainly we would want to leverage that and bring together those two factors. So absolutely could be considered.
Pete, I have a question. I've had several parents approach me asking about going to a true homeschool model, meaning leaving the district and doing a homeschool via some other avenue. If parents are not comfortable sending their kids back to school for the AM PM schedule, will the school district be available to offer them full-time online?
Yep, that's an excellent question. We've been noticing an uptick in activity across the state for online providers, folks that want students to leave the traditional neighborhood school, and it certainly is a viable option for many students across the state. What we're trying to be cautious of and balance, Lindsay, is what's our responsibility to the workload for our employees and our responsibility to our parents and our students. And what we had considered doing based on some of the feedback we received that's similar to what you've shared is, after this presentation, we want to re-engage with our employees this week in a series of Zoom conversations to get their feedback. But we were also thinking about a targeted and specific survey for our community to say, hey, here's what we're thinking. Here's where we're at in the planning. Are you coming back to school? And really get a hard and fast number about what we might be talking about. So if we were open in next week, are we in a position to go online and blended? I don't think we're in a great position to do that. But if that's the direction that our stakeholders tell us we need to go, we're ready to pivot and go that way. We've been investing the time and energy on a blended approach because that's what we heard in the initial survey from our community, which included teachers. So I think we'd want to ask a few more questions. But if a parent came today and we were starting tomorrow, we'd have to send them to a homeschool approach or one of the sort of vendors that's out there already doing online learning.
A second part to that question is, if we do have an unforeseen mass exodus of students choosing to do an online approach, is our district, I've talked to members of I've talked to employees who work at the district office. So I know this conversation is being had amongst the district, but I just wanted to put the mind at ease of some community members. Is the district office working on budgeting for a mass exodus of students? And I don't mean mass exodus like something crazy, but if there is, I mean, even a 5%, a 5% of our students go to a true online homeschool approach and they leave the district, is the district at least preparing somewhat budgeting wise for something like that to happen so that we aren't caught in a pickle?
I guess the perspective I would share from the teaching and learning side of it, and having been part of some of those conversations, is that we've certainly been conservative in our approach to budgeting across the board based on what we're hearing across the state and across the country. Not because we're expecting this massive exodus, but because of the impact on the economy that the shutdown has really created. So I know we've been conservative in that sense. I would defer to Jeanette and Dr. Hurst for any additional comment around that.
Thank you.
Pete, really quick question for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you were going to start Zoom meetings next week. Would that be for all employees? Because I've had a handful come to me and they didn't even know about tonight's meeting and the presentation or anything that was involved with it. They haven't really had much contact since the official last day of school. And
so what we've done,
like some of them were being left out of the loop.
Gotcha, understood.
Or
what we have done with our conversations is included OEA and PSE leadership, and we've also included the school leadership teams. When we met with them, what we shared with them is we actually were gonna run those sessions last week in preparation for this meeting, but we thought it was more appropriate to share it with the board first to get some big picture feedback before we rolled it out to our employees. So we didn't put the board in a difficult position. So we have been communicating with OEA and PSC leadership about those sessions, and we actually hope to run them this week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, scheduling out what I imagine what it'll be is a communication perhaps from Ed Peterson or from the central office saying, here's a Zoom link, check in, and it'll be a presentation very similar to this, just a dialogue with some of our folks who perhaps aren't on their school leadership teams or haven't been consistently in the loop. So that will be happening over the next couple of weeks.
Good, because I think we're at the point that we start to need to involve a lot of our other employees, or at least let them know what the plan is starting to build and look like, so they could start to have preparations or decide what they need to do.
Hey, Pete, I'm going to jump in here on the finance question. So there is a delicate balance, and we will, have to play the situation as it comes and as we gather more information in these upcoming surveys from parents and things like that. There is some flexibility as far as engaging students online, and there has been some information from OSPI regarding expectations for districts as far as touching base with kids and things like that. We will definitely be engaging in those conversations to, try and retain the engagement as much as we can. And we understand that a lot of families or some families have concerns about sending their kids back to school. So we're going to try our best to address those concerns. It's impossible to predict the future. And so, yes, we're aware that there might be potentially a handful to a large number undetermined of students who their families don't feel comfortable them coming back to school. And so we'll take those situations as they come. we have things that we can pull back on as far as funding or financing goes. But, we want to make those decisions just as responsibly as we can without, putting the cart before the horse too much.
Jeanette, just a kind of simple question. When I did see that 18.8% saying no, that's the first thing. And I've had a lot of parents express that they were going to do online also, same as Lindsay has. If we did have, let's say 10% of the students did not re-enroll back into school, when would we see that in our budget process throughout the year? Would it be the reimbursement through the state? Would it come, 6 months down the road, halfway through there? Or would we notice it more next year on budgeting again when we get that reimbursement from the state?
It's a great question. So it's kind of multi-tiered, I guess. So we report actual enrollment every single month. So once the enrollment date for September hits, we will know how many kids are showing up versus how many we expected. That will then, if there's a significant drop, that will then engage the conversation of, okay, now we know how many kids are here. What are we going to do? Are we going to adjust strategy, adjust expenses? Those kinds of conversations will start to happen pretty quickly in September. And then as far as the funding goes, state funding is based on budgeted enrollment all the way until January. So fiscally, the district wouldn't see any changes as far as funding goes until January hits. So that's when the state funding, which is the bulk of the funding the district receives, that's when that would be adjusted. And then the other large funding source is the levy funding, and then also the LEA, which is the state match on the local levy dollars. And right now our state match is about 2.5 state match dollars to every $1 of local taxpayer money. And so that money would be changed in January of 2021. And so because the taxes are based on the calendar year, not the fiscal year. And so now that I'm thinking.
Those are based on property assessments anyway. They're not really adjusted by how many students we have in the school. And I think
so the levy is based
to how many students we have.
Sorry. The levy is based on the taxpayer base, but the state match does have an enrollment factor. So that would be where the change would come. And so that's where the adjustment would be. And actually, so next school year is 2020 and 2021. So it would be the calendar year 2022 taxes that would be, or levy equalization state match that would be impacted. So it would be the following fiscal year. So there would be kind of a two-part hit there for the district. It would be within the current fiscal year for the state funding and the following fiscal year for the local state match funding.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Before moving forward with just the last piece here around health and safety, I just, the comment earlier about communication with the stakeholders and the Zoom sessions that we're going to run this week. I do want to recognize, I do know that OEA sent out a communication to all its members, encouraging them to listen in tonight and to participate in this evening's meeting. And I also know that the LEA sent out messaging across the district and across the community to let folks know that we'd be considering that tonight. So I did want folks to know that those two organizations and those two individuals have been working hard to get out the messaging about opportunities to participate. So I didn't want to recognize them for that. Back to the health and safety protocols. I want to touch a little bit on temperature checks. Perhaps for some of you, if you've been to different facilities in the last several months, that's been your experience. We've been working closely with a safety and health team. It's made up of of Abby Helmus, our health services director, Greg Foltz, Sandra, Jeanette, some other stakeholders that get together and are talking about PPE and temperature check stations and those kinds of things. So we've asked our principals to come up with plans for each site that allows for controlled entries at multiple points that supports and promotes social distancing. Our expectation is that we would take temperatures at each of those entry points, ask them the 5 typical questions related to the COVID virus that you may have heard in other places, and then send students on their way if they are healthy and ready to go to school. So that John is going to describe a little bit what a school student day will look like here in a few moments, but I did want to let you know that that's our expected protocol when school opens up. Related to PPE specifically, we are in a consortium, I believe, with the local ESD. They're working to buy items in bulk. So we're working on things like thermometers and hand sanitizers, cleaning products, all those kinds of things. The consortium across our region is working to make sure that those are available for all of our employees and our students. And we would expect that we'd be in a good position when school opens up to provide the necessary resources. Next slide, please, Dalia. Now we're going to talk a little bit about a second area from our research related to transportation, meals, and athletics and activities. We talked a little bit earlier about when are kids going to come to school, what time of day, if they're only attending in the morning or afternoon, how are they going to get their meals, what will meals look like at school, can high school students leave campus, those kinds of things that has been our traditional model. And as we move to a blended model, understanding there are going to have to be some adjustments and some changes. So I do want to repeat what I shared earlier, that related to the K-8 AM/PM model, it really was focused on daily contact and engagement. We know that in the springtime, it was very difficult for many of our students to engage in the work, and that it was a challenge for some of them. They were not engaged at the end of that whole process. We think in this daily model, we can certainly make an impact there. We're also considering student stamina and bringing kids in on that full day model in a smaller group. So they stay, maybe they're on an A/B schedule like the high school, but we got concerned about the intensity of the instruction in that model, and perhaps that this AM/PM model would be able to spread that out and support student stamina. And then logistically, the ability to hand out meals. If we bring every kid on our campus K-8, we'll be able to solve that model of going out to these general areas in mass to deliver meals to our K-8 students. So again, our plan is to bring our city students into the schools in the AM. We'd still provide one transfer bus that we've used across the district, primarily for students who have chosen dual language as their model. And we're really going to encourage our students to walk, ride a bike, or their parent will drop them off. That's what we're going to do for our AM students, K-8. Our afternoon students, they would be able to ride the bus. The guidance has been modified over time for what the bus experience can be like, but that we would expect students would be wearing masks, the windows would be open, we'd have them sitting in their family groups, those kinds of accommodations, but we would be able to bus our students in. Now in the AB high school model, again, the question has come up, why not AM/PM? And really it became a scaling issue. With 1,200 students on that campus, we just had a lot of difficulty getting over some of the challenges we would have to minimize risk. And so we opted for the AB model. We'll talk a little bit more about the staff perception and input into that decision as well. Again, back to the need for transportation for our AB students. We have a model that we've used in our summer schools for years for our secondary students, where they sign up for transportation. So it would be a similar process if you're signing up for transportation or signing up for the AM PM option if you're 9-12. We have some structures that are already in place that we've used in summer school for several years. Again, this gets back to our top priority, which is to minimize exposure and to provide as much safety and security as we can for our students and our staff. Well, that's what transportation would look and feel like in this model. Any questions in particular about that?
I do. It's not actually in reference to transportation, but just to verify and clarify, even if your student is, let's say, in the city and they're a K-8 student and they go to school in the morning, when they come home, it doesn't mean that their school day is done, or the same with a high school. If they're on an A day, even on B days when they're home, they're still doing like work online with the teacher, possibly watching a camera of the classroom, or it doesn't mean that they're done after they go home when they're at home. Correct?
Correct. That's the blended approach. And we'll talk in detail about where we're at with our professional development for teachers. But again, I do want to circle back to, we haven't talked about any scenarios in a blended model where we would have a camera in the classroom and a student at home engaging in that format. We have talked about the possibility of what do we already have? What are our folks already trained in? How do we promote fluency and accuracy and those kinds of skills in students? How do we transition some of the activities that might happen in a class that a teacher could front load and then the student take home and complete? So it's going to be, it's still going to be a heavy lift for our teachers, but not as much as the shift to a total online experience. But the expectation is very different than it was in the spring. I think we heard very clearly from the state initially with the do no harm model. Some students took that as do no work. And that's not what we want to promote. We certainly can't sustain another year where students do not engage. So the expectation would be that they participate in the work. And certainly I think the expectation is that we provide the support and training that our teachers need to make that transition to a blended approach. But it should be a full school day. They're just on campus half the time.
Okay, so, and you might not be able to answer this. So what you're saying is let's say in an elementary classroom, they're teaching the exact same thing in the AM and in the PM. The students are just taking that work home to do it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. So you would have, if I had 20 first graders, I'm gonna have approximately 10 in the morning, and we're gonna focus on the standards that the school and the teachers and the principals have identified as most critical, because we only have them for that 50% of the time. We're gonna focus on those skills in the morning, and then we're gonna create activities and opportunities and experiences that the student can do at home independently or under the guidance of a parent or guardian or an older sibling. So that would be the experience for our staff and for our families.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to verify that part. Thank you.
I have two questions. Question number one, will fall sports be in full swing for both the middle school and the high school? And what will that look like for attending games? And my second question is for K-8, because they'll have such limited time at school to get the essentials in, will specials still be offered? And if not, what will the specials teachers be assisting in?
Yep. So I'll tackle the specials question first. We are trying to make the experience that the students have in this blended model when they're at school as normal and as typical as possible. So our current plan is to conduct specials. They're still going to have opportunities for PE and art and computers. One that is a little bit different is going to be the band and music experience. When our conversations with our local experts, Brett Hoffmeister, Amber Johnson, Will Ludy, some of the other folks, they have shared with us that their national associations are cautioning any sort of band or choir activities that promote sort of the spreading of particles that is involved in those kinds of activities. So I know they're thinking about how they can still offer a music appreciation experience that would be different than what it's been. But back to your original question, we will be offering specials to our elementary students. Related to athletics and activities, I believe that on the 21st of this month, we're expecting additional guidance from WIAA. I know in my conversations with Jenny McCordy, the athletic director, and her circle of athletic folks, I guess the word I would use today is they're very, very nervous about an opportunity to offer any activities in August or September. I think they're cautiously optimistic, but folks have stepped back, and as we pay attention to sort of national associations and college football and those kinds of things, if they don't go, it's highly unlikely that we would have that opportunity. So I know that their state associations are talking about additional opportunities in the springtime, shifts in schedules or activities, but until they tell us we can't do it, we're planning on offering it. But we're cautious about where that's going to go.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Related to food service, we would expect that our AM kids, when they would get a breakfast when they came to school, we would not be using common lunch spaces. Kids would not be coming to the gym or to the commons or to a general area. They would be checked at the point of entry, go directly to their classroom, have their assigned seating area, and they would eat breakfast there. Then we would ask them to take home a sack lunch. In the afternoon, it would just be the reverse of that. Kids would arrive at school through their assigned entry point, eat lunch at school, and they would take home a sack breakfast for the next day. So that would give us an excellent opportunity to provide meals like we have over the break and the closure. That this model really supports that opportunity. Now 9-12, it's going to be a similar experience, pre-packaged meals, but a significant change for the 9-12 students would be a closed campus. Once we get students on campus, in the interest of minimizing risk, they would not be allowed to leave for lunch. That's not the model that we think is the safest. We're working with Othello High School now on their schedule and some adjustments to the length of class periods, perhaps a daily advisory session that would include some component of lunch. But a significant part of that is our collective bargaining agreement with OEA and the requirement for a duty-free lunch. So we're working on the supervision and the manpower. We feel fairly comfortable with where we're at with the solution, but we are still in conversation with them about that model. The students we would have to figure out related to lunch would be on the A days is the 9-12B kids who don't get a meal. And I think we would want to check in with Marion and with our food services folks about the level of participation from our 9-12 students at those remote sites for meal delivery. And I believe we'd be able to offer that it would be scaled down considerably because we're able to feed everybody else, but we'd still be able to offer that meal support in this model. That was my wait time for Elise and Lauren to ask about closed campus. If they're not going to reply, I'm going to move on.
I don't have any questions about closed campus. Can I ask a different question though right now? I don't really know when to ask it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just wondering, let's say hypothetically in January, they put out something like the state or something that says that we can go back to school normally. Would we do that, or would we finish the school year however we decide to go back, or what would happen?
Yeah, that's a great question, Elise. So the answer is yes and no. Yes, we would be locked into the schedule that we're recommending right now from the secondary site, and I'll share that in a few slides. But because of the way that you earn credits and how we have to keep on track once we start a school year, we would have to stay in the AB model. If we're able to open up more fully, though, you could see opportunities where more kids could be on campus, where we could offer additional experiences, where we could open lunch up. Those kinds of activities, we would certainly want to move to that least restrictive end of the spectrum. But once we get into the model of AB and students accruing credits in this semester model, we would have to lock in 9-12 for the entire school year. Now K-8, we could pivot immediately to a more traditional every school day model, but we are locking ourselves in 9/12.
When you say locking in, they're not. I guess I don't understand how high school would not be able to come back 100% of the students in an AB, because they're still, that first semester is with your, I know that we'll get to your schedule plan, but I don't understand how we wouldn't be able to bring all those students back even with an AB day.
Right. So what we're doing is we're extending the amount of minutes that a student spends in class by going from a 7-period day to a 4-period day. And when you do that, you accelerate the time. So in a full year, in a traditional school year, I could earn 1 credit. By compressing the schedule in such a way, I'm going to earn that 1 credit in half a year. Once we make that commitment, we can't change a teacher's workload or a teacher's schedule. If we change mid-year, it would be a scenario where you could offer 1.5 times the credit that you could typically offer in a school year. And we can't logistically do that. It's not appropriate to do that. So once we get into taking the 7-period model in the sort of traditional approach, we're moving back to, now we're going to get 4 periods done that first semester. And once we start that, there's not an opportunity to go back. We're going to be locked into that model. Now, what we could open up is, are there ways to bring specific student groups back for additional support? Perhaps it's for language development services. Perhaps it's for AP prep. Perhaps it's for some of the other social emotional things that we've been missing during the closure. Those opportunities would be expanded, but also this idea about student workload. What we learned in the spring is that the engagement was difficult, and to ask students to engage 7 periods a day online was next to impossible. So this would give them the opportunity to have a more manageable workload. And I think it's really a creative way that the high schools thought about it. They are going to experience the biggest change.
Okay. And then Elise brought up a very interesting point that I don't think that we've actually hit on yet. There is the possibility of possibly a massive outbreak or an outbreak at a specific campus that makes everything is completely online because of one thing or another, that it could go either way. It could go from this blended you're talking about to completely online, like happened in the spring, or go from this blended to completely traditional within this school year. That's just something that I think that I just want to confirm that either of those things may be a possibility.
Absolutely. And what you'll hear towards the end of the presentation is our current plan for support for our staff to offer the not only the blended piece, but potentially a more consistent online experience. And we'll talk about the training that we've experienced over the summer and what we will provide for staff here in August.
Thank you.
I have another question. With this situation of not being able to go off campus for lunch, will students be able to bring their own lunch to school, or will they have to eat the lunch that the school provides?
Yeah, I haven't heard of any constraints, Elise, around not being able to bring in your own meals. So my expectation would be that the students could bring their own lunch to school. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Pete, I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've already covered it, and you may have, for K-8 teachers, if they're teaching in the AM and they're teaching in the PM and they're teaching that 5 days a week, when is their like prep period? Or I know before we had done, late start on Mondays to give them time to come up with to do all of their teacher prep. So how will they adjust to teaching online and in the classroom while working full time?
I want to add to that question just really big, because I just had a question sent me that falls along the same line, that if a teacher is teaching in the morning and he's teaching in the afternoon, but where's his prep time for the online blending too? When do they have time for that? Or if they're teaching in the afternoon, how could they do the online blending in the afternoon?
Yeah, that's really one of the first questions that we get when we talk about these experiences for students and staff. Related to the prep time, we've been in conversations and collaboration with OEA leadership about a couple of models, case 6, that allow us to continue with specials, but also meet the requirements of the CDA. So I'm confident that we'll be able to, we're actually not be able, we're required to offer those prep time minutes. So we're working with OEA through that, so teachers can feel comfortable in knowing that they will have their prep time. Related to late start, there would be an adjustment as long as we're in the blended model where we wouldn't have the late start. But we've also, again, had conversations with OEA leadership about ways to continue to offer that support and those opportunities for teachers. So that's certainly been a consideration, but in the model being presented, that opportunity would go away. Related to the blended learning and the additional workload that it sounds like came from the questions you received, what we've been talking about and what you'll hear about at the end of the presentation is how do we make that as fluid and as reasonable, not only for our families and our students, but particularly our teachers. And so we really want to talk about products and tools that we already have, things that students have had experience with, that our teachers have experience with, that they're not plug and play, but that don't require as heavy a lift as is a true traditional online model would be. And so we've asked our principals to share with our teachers what blended learning would look and feel like. And perhaps at the next board meeting, Dr. Hurst, or here, I could send out that definition of blended learning that we landed on, and that could provide some clarity for the board. But also I could include that in our presentation with staff as well, so that they have a clear understanding of what blended looks like and feels like.
Pete, one of the questions I've been asked is, are they going to have to quarantine every time for 2 weeks if someone comes in sick in their classroom?
Yeah, that's another question that we're getting pretty consistently. And we have been reviewing some protocols from schools across the country. And really, if you think about a flow chart that says, this is what happened, this is the risk, this is what close contact means, we would expect that we would have a protocol in place to share with folks. And that is going to have to be vetted and shared with our local Department of Health to make sure that it's appropriate. Right now, what we're working with is that's sort of the standard, right? You quarantine until, that's what we're hearing across the country. If you go on vacation, if you go someplace else, 14 days seems to be the magic window. But we really need to have that dialed in and locked down so that our employees know if someone does test positive, how are we going to react? And we have some excellent models in place that we expect to share with OEA and PSC and our other groups. So if it was tomorrow, Sharon, we had school, the protocol has been 14 days, right? You lock down and shut down. But I think we're going to want to hear from other schools across the country as they open before us and other entities and learn from what they're doing and then keep the safety and health of our teachers and our kids at the top of the list so that we do what's appropriate and expected. But I think we're all prepared for not if, but when. I believe the count today in our community was 21 in Adams County. And as it stands now, my understanding is we're still in phase 2, and the limits on groups for phase 2 continues to be 5 individuals. So I'm not 100% confident that the county would let us open up in even this blended model. But again, Karen Potts has indicated her commitment to supporting us through this. So that would be a question we should take back to her and get some guidance for her and could provide the feedback to the board.
Pete, I don't know if you're at the liberty of answering, but I was asked several times today, in the event of a quarantine, what does that mean for the staff member as far as utilizing sick pay, personal time, and all those other things, how that would affect them?
Yeah, I probably know enough about it just to be in the conversation, but I would defer some of that to Sandra. I know that expectations around leave and those kinds of things were much more flexible in the spring as folks across the state were dealing with that. She might have the most relevant information about where we're at and what opportunities employees might have for appropriate leave.
Yeah, this is Sandra, Mike. I can chime in on that piece. There has been a federal mandate, a new act that was released, I believe it was released April 1st, if I'm not mistaken. And the act goes through December 31st of 2020. It's called the Families First Response Coronavirus Act. And what it does, it essentially gives staff some additional leave resources that they could utilize if they have been asked to quarantine, excuse me, or been in contact with COVID. So there are some resources that we can walk staff through so they would not have to utilize their own sick leave, personal leave time if they've been exposed.
All right, thank you.
Lauren, go for it.
Okay. I just had a question because in the past, if for some reason a student missed more than 10 days of a class, they automatically failed. So what are we going to do if a student gets sick or is exposed and they have to quarantine for 2 weeks? Will they fail that class too? Or how are we going to go about that?
Yeah, my understanding of that practice at the high school related to the automatic failure, there were always considerations and opportunities to appeal when it was health related. So this would follow under that same area. This might be a good opportunity, though, Lauren, now that you bring it up, for us to look closer at that policy and say, for this school year or in these circumstances, we're not going to force a student or their family to submit an appeal if they've been exposed or had to miss school. So we'll add that to the list for the conversation, but you should have some assurity that we wouldn't penalize students for that.
In reference to that policy, the phrasing is may be or could or something like that, could be failed. It doesn't automatically mean that they were failed if they missed those days. My question is actually about subs. Since there's many options for potential missing staff for extended periods of time and all kinds of things, are we trying to bulk up our sub list for both teachers, janitors, paras, food service, just to make sure that we don't get to the point that we can't function on a specific campus because of loss of staff? I know that a recently retired teacher a couple years ago, even another campus, another district in Tri-Cities has been reaching out, trying to drum up more substitutes just to have a bigger pool from to be able to survive a year.
Yeah, I know we continue to have our positions posted for subs in all categories. And, we've been, I guess our best recruitment lately has been retention, and we've been able to hold on to most of our teachers this year in particular. But we are certainly expecting that there are going to be some challenges around substitutes and having proper protocols for those folks as well. And do we want people switching between schools and doing those kinds of things? What I think we need to be prepared for is, again, the flexibility and fluidity of saying, well, we know that teacher's going to be out for a couple of weeks and we can't sub it. Is it appropriate to move kids around? Is it appropriate to say those groups of students won't have access to campus? They're going to pivot fully online. I think the complexity of the problem is in all the questions that come with it, that we'll just have to be able to not shut down the whole campus if it's appropriate, but to isolate those areas and perhaps offer even less than we can. So it's that whole continuum of most restrictive and least restrictive. I think we're going to be living in that world until we're able to open up in the traditional model. But sub shortage is certainly going to be a concern for us.
I have another question. If I know right now for like students in advanced classes or like English language learners, we have things like programs after school like Gear Up that they can go to get help with their classes if they're struggling. So I'm just wondering if we go all online or if we do our blended thing, or are we gonna have those programs in place to help students that are struggling with their classes, whether we're online or at school physically?
Yeah, Elise, I think your comment and your question gets right out the comment that was shared in the public comment section of today's meeting. There really has been guidance from the state around students that have struggled. And so you've identified some of the resources that are already available in the district. And it might also resources that are available for students who are taking an advanced course and just need additional support so they can be successful on those assessments. If we are forced to go fully online and can open up in even a more restricted way where you can have 20 kids on campus for 1 hour every other day, we want to think really clearly about how we provide those targeted resources. So if it is around Gear Up or it is around additional support, we would ask our teachers and our principals to say, okay, these are the rules now, these are the restrictions now, here's who we're going to target. That's what we would ask our building principals to think through with their teachers. Now, if we're totally online, then we just have to think about how do we do it better than we did in the spring? How do we create office hours and opportunities for students and families to engage with education professionals in this sort of format in a safe way? And we're really confident that our teachers are going to be better prepared and have the training and time to offer better support for students. And it wasn't for a lack of effort. It was really that we really changed their job.
I agree with that. And, I really compliment what our teachers did, because all this was through with just a couple days notice. But I still see one of the greatest challenges, even with a blended model learning or full online model, is we still have a large group of scholars or students out there that do not have internet access. And are we looking at what other avenues we could try to accommodate those students that don't? Have we actually got a kind of like an inventory of who does not have internet access and what we could do to get it to them?
Yeah, we do have a good idea of students and families that don't have reliable internet access, but certainly could be an additional question if we determine that it's appropriate to put out another survey. But we have really good data around that now. I know that we've also been able to purchase a bank of hotspots, and Dr. Hurst has been working closely with Rigo Ozuna and the tech staff around that. But that gets back to that idea of targeted support. So this is just a what if scenario. If you could only have 100 kids on a campus the size of Othello High School, could you bring them in 2-hour chunks, and it's open primarily or targeted to students who don't have internet access, right? Those kinds of things that we think about if we're not in a position to provide the hotspot devices for all of our students, because that's certainly a significant expense. And I think it highlights a broader conversation in our community, in our state, and our country about reliable internet access for all. It's certainly been one of the topics related to equity that folks have been struggling with. So Ken, back to your question, we know who those kids are. We're hopeful they can come in a blended model. And can we create things or activities that they could use offline, but perhaps they would download on campus? We have lots of really highly skilled teachers that are already doing those kinds of things. And we've been reaching out to them to say, hey, can you help train up everybody else? But we wouldn't be as truthful as we need to be if I said that internet access isn't a significant concern or fear for us. The kids just might not be able to engage with it.
Thank you, Pete, for it.
All right, moving forward to the health and safety precautions related to classrooms. We're going to talk about them in the 3 distinct areas, K-6, 7-8, and 9-12, and really sort of the operations of the schools. Just again, a reminder that your students are only going to be on campus half the time, And we're going to do our best to keep on a consistent schedule for families and keep families together. And we're going to limit contact and run that 50% capacity. That's where we're at right now. Again, limiting exposure, small groups of students, being able to be mindful of who came in contact with who, and that everyone feels as safe as possible on our campuses. At the middle school level, it would be a very similar experience. This gets at some of the questions that Lindsay asked earlier about athletics and activities. We also have the lockers and the sort of that experience of the transition to a middle school day. But otherwise, it will look very similar. K-8, a very similar experience for our kids. And John's going to talk us through what those days might look and feel like.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Next slide, Talia. All right. So we talked about a lot of changes, right? A lot of different things that are happening and what we're required to do, but our goal is to try to make the experience for our students as welcoming and as normal as we possibly can. So what would that day look like with all of the precautions and safety measures that we have to put in place? So this is just kind of an outline of what a student day might look like. If they're a student that's going to be on the bus, they will be wearing a mask, and weather permitting, the windows will be open, circulate the air. As Pete had mentioned earlier, that students with siblings, they can sit together, but we'll try to space out as much as we can with the different groups. When they arrive, they're going to have a designated entrance that they go to. They're going to be welcomed by staff members. They'll be asked the screening questions that we referred to earlier and do a quick temperature check. We're looking at different ways to do that. That's kind of least intrusive as possible, just on the forehead or those type of measures. Then they'll enter the classroom, they'll wash their hands, they'll sit down in their designated spot, and then school will begin. They'll be able to have that. When they have their meals, they'll have another set time that they'll be able to wash their hands. They'll be eating in the classroom. That way we can maintain the social distancing as opposed to large areas coming together. They'll certainly be able to still talk with their friends and be able to have conversations and be kids. But it's just going to be in a fashion that we can keep them safe. In class, we'll do activities that are fun and engaging, but still be able to be mindful of keeping students apart. When it's time to leave, there'll be a process and a routine that's in place of cleaning their desks, washing their hands, putting away their backpack. If they're a morning group, when they leave, they'll have a sack lunch with them, like a sack breakfast, that they'll take. Hold on, let me go back there. So if they're an AM student, they'll eat breakfast in the classroom and then they'll take a lunch home. If they're a PM student, they'll eat lunch in the classroom and then they'll take the next day's breakfast home. And that'll be how the day is set up and what that looks like. Any questions about just kind of the general feel of what a student day would be? All right.
Is that specific time set up yet, John? Like what a start time would be for AM and what a start time would be for PM?
That is something that I know we've been working with Marion Transportation on, because what we want to make sure is we have enough of a staggered time so that kids don't be congregating and meeting while they're waiting, for a pickup or something like that. I don't have the exact times or the bell schedules with me today, but it is something certainly that we'll want to get communicated once we work that out.
No rush, I was just curious.
Related to the bell schedule, that work was actually completed Thursday or Friday prior to the submittal of this presentation to the board. But I can certainly get a copy to Dr. Hurst and he could share with the board as an initial communication. That work has been done. All right. One other comment about what the school day might look and feel like. We've been talking and meeting with our Director of Communications, Ed Peterson, And so we're thinking through a series of videos that would model and provide a visual for students and families to think about what it might look and feel like before school opens up. We think that will be an effective way to share with folks who may be a little bit nervous or are not sure about what it's going to feel like to come to school. So I did want to let the board know that we're working on preparing that sort of visual tool for our families.
I think that sounds like a great idea to have that modeling. Before we go on to the high school, I just wanted to ask about high cap. I know that is an extremely small room. Would that still be like an AM and a PM? Or has there been discussion about how that affects? It sounds like you've discussed how it affects specials, but how would it affect that?
Yeah, we have talked about high cap. We are still under the understanding that continues to be a requirement for school districts to meet the needs of those students. So I've met with Heidi Wagner, our special ed director, who's been in close contact with our instructor who leads that work around high cap. We would expect that it would follow a very similar model to what we're suggesting, a very similar protocol. The additional factors that need to be considered there are we willing to bring students from other campuses together? Are we willing to take on that risk? Where we landed in our last conversation was around, we are going to have some students from different campuses on buses. And so we wanted to engage in a conversation with Karen Potts about, well, is it appropriate to have a handful of kids come together and gather for these activities? So certainly a work in process, but the expectations around hygiene and social distancing and minimizing risk, they're all going to play a factor in what high cap looks like next year.
Well, and also there may be a higher, especially with a specific grade or not, there might be a higher number that are in town as opposed to county. And so they may have to have an afternoon schedule for some of those students when they normally have. Anyways, those are great that you've been discussing it. That's more than anything what I wanted to hear, that's not been forgotten about, I guess.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Pete,
So
also,
school level.
hey, Pete,
Yeah.
I know we haven't discussed SPED at all. In all this planning, I assume there's some, they're being included in all this and how this will affect them if they're part of the family, AM, PM, AB, and all that other stuff. I just want to assure everyone that those things are being considered as well. If you could touch on that, please.
Yeah, so I think we can learn a lot from our special ed folks in this kind of work. They live in a world that demands flexibility. They live in a world that demands creativity and considers student health and safety every day. And so absolutely, we're in conversations with them. We're learning from them. And we're also learning about our responsibility to continue to provide that whole concept of least restrictive. It comes from the world of special ed. So we're really considering and developing these sort of individualized plans for students based on the current health crisis. So absolutely, they're an important part of the conversation.
Thanks for that, Pete.
All right, related to high school teaching and learning, again, we talked earlier about the 7 class load for students and what a challenge that was for them in the springtime. So one of the considerations for moving to this AB model. We also feel like we can address the childcare need for some of our families by opting into that AM PM schedule, and will just require an adjustment in outreach on our part. We also know that because of the 1,200 students, that's one of the drivers of not going to AM PM, just the sheer number of transitions and those factors around taking temps and monitoring entrance. If we can just get through that once a day and maintain some of the student contact and instruction time, preserve that as much as possible. The AB schedule supports that. We also have the additional factor of trying to balance graduation requirements with the student experience. I know that I believe Lauren's going to be a senior and Elise is a sophomore now. We want to make sure that they get the credits, they and their friends get the credits and experience that they need to be ready for whatever their post-secondary choices are. So we have some really, we've been given some flexibility last year by the state, but certainly they're going back to what's expected, that we can provide a meaningful experience so they earn a meaningful high school diploma. This schedule will also give us an opportunity to consider a daily advisory structure at the high school, partnered with lunch. And I think one of the things we've really been wrestling with here locally is the social emotional impact that this closure has had on our kids, what it's going to have when they come back, what it's going to have when we have to close for 14 days. That's a whole new layer of stress and anxiety for some of our students that a 4-period day would allow us to engage in more consistently. But again, I do want to remind everyone that we would be committing to the schedule for the entire school year, scrunching down a year's worth of credit and a year's worth of material into that half-day schedule. The next slide provides a visual of that work. And I do want to highlight in particular here is that this was also built on choices that students already made, trying to preserve as much of that student voice as possible. The several options were considered at the high school, and the majority of departments ranked this option as their top choice regarding extended periods and extended student contact time. And to reiterate, it also facilitates a more manageable workload during a blended or distance learning model if we have to go that way. And that's feedback we heard from our students, our families, and our teachers, that 7 periods online was just very, very difficult. This also allows us to use the current version of our schedule to meet graduation requirements and honor student choice. If we had to go back and rebuild that schedule, just logistically, that's hundreds of man hours. We're already in a position where we're having to consider the technical impact of making this switch. And so this model also supports the preservation of that work that's already been done. It's the model that the folks at the high school think is best for students and best for teachers.
So similar to with the elementary, just looking at what a day would look like with the high school students. Talia, if we could see the next slide, please. So some
John,
things, yeah.
Before you go into this, I have a few questions on the schedule, and I assume that the student reps have quite a few questions on the schedule.
Sure, I apologize.
Indicated. So let's let the student reps go first.
I just had a question about, so normally OHS had split their schedules into semester 1, semester 2. So during semester 1, I would have English 101 A, and then I would have English 101 B. So are we going to take those classes and condense them? Or how, I guess my main question is how is the new schedule going to affect those classes that are normally split in half?
Yep, you hit it right on the head, Lauren. That's exactly what's going to happen. The example that you shared, I would want to get some clarity around, because the example you shared is a college level course. And there are some courses that were at the mercy of the university. But what you described, if it was English 12, 12A and 12B, we're going to take that semester, and the periods are going to be much longer than you would have had in a traditional 7-period day. So you will earn 1 credit at the end of that semester. So essentially A and B you would get at that time. It will be done in a semester.
Okay, yeah, that just addressed both of my questions, because I was going to ask along the lines of credits too. How are we going to earn our credits and fulfill those graduation requirements? But if we are earning a credit a semester for our class, then that should keep us on point, on our target for the majority of us.
Exactly.
All right, I have a question. When we're talking about splitting into A and B groups, how are we splitting up? Are we doing city and country? Are we doing by grade level? what is our thinking?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The complexity for the AB selection at the high school is really going to be driven in part by the courses you selected. So that's going to have some factor. I do believe, though, that the high school has said the most equitable way to do it, and what would make sense for their teaming and their process so far, is it would be by alpha. So at least G, you're going to be with a lot of the kids who are in that G category. What has to be done, though, Elise, is once we get approval from the board and the community that says this is the direction we're going, the high school schedule is much more complicated than an elementary or middle level schedule. And so they'll have to take all those numbers. They do something that's called conflict analysis. And they say, we run this class in this period. It makes the most sense for 95% of our kids. That's where it's going to go. So those details would come out as we get approval from the board and move into early August. But I believe they're working from that perspective of let's use the alphabet designation right now.
Elise, do you have more questions? Or are you good?
I think that was it.
Okay. So let's say fifth period under the current schedule, a student has that's their like elective. So half of the year they have the first semester they had weights, and the second semester they had welding. So it's only on a quarter system for electives, correct?
Correct. So again, back to the scheduling conflicts and the complexity of that. There's some of those singletons when they build a schedule at the high school level. They have some filters that they start with. So back to Mike's point earlier, we're gonna place all the special education classes and students and teachers. Those are going to be locked in. Then we're going to lock in this next band of students and this next band. Typically, the electives are more flexible and can be moved around. And I know that's one of the concerns they have in building the schedule, is to maintain as much student choice as possible. But they're also asking staff to consider if welding was going to be only a semester course, how can you adjust it and add additional content and rigor to make it a semester-long course? So there'll have to be some give and take with the teaching staff as well. And I know they're asking teachers to think about those adjustments already.
Okay, my next question is about release time, typically called seminary. So I know that that's typically, like, I think it's second and third period in past years. So does that mean that seminary would only be release time, because I know that there are other groups that use it as well, would only be available first semester? Or is there another plan?
Yeah, so all courses would be the 1.0 value and locked into that one semester. I know related to the release time activities that we've supported, we would want to ask that if that content was delivered over a year-long schedule and the rest of the school is shifting that way, for those instructors to shift their instruction in that model as well. I do also believe that there are some online options, and perhaps also one other factor we were considering was, is there a way to use the off day? So if I'm an A student and I have release time second period and I go there every A day, that doesn't preclude me from also going on a B day.
Okay. So maybe second semester, if they still wanted to participate on their off day, they could still go on their off day, is what you're telling me.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. That's good to hear that that's been thought of and considered. So thank you.
You bet. Next slide, please, Talia.
All right, so similar to elementary, just kind of a snapshot of what a student day might look like. When they arrive, they'll also have a designated entrance where they'll be asked the screening questions and have their temperature checked, make sure that everybody is healthy and well. It's an opportunity for them as they see their classmates to socialize. We will have structured time where they wash and sanitize their hands. That will be built into the schedule. As we've already discussed at length here, a 4-period day. putting in protocols for social distancing to try to keep students apart at a safe distance. They'll continue to be working with each other, but it's just going to look a little different. It's going to feel a little different. Students will be wearing masks as well. We'll have an advisory where they can share stories, express themselves, build community if there's concerns. That's something that we really want to make sure that we absolutely hit the academic side of the house, but we also want to look at the social emotional side of the student as well, and what sort of impact this is having, and if they're feeling loss or confusion or fear, that we have a safe spot that we can identify those feelings. In lunch, again, there's going to be talking and conversing and be able to have that, but we're not going to be able to meet in the large common area. And as already been mentioned, it'll be a closed to the campus. That's for the safety of our students. And we're working on a process where they'll be eating lunch in the classroom as well. As far as homework and routines,
John?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Just to clarify, so lunch will be in the advisory classroom. They'll have lunch and advisory in that same space.
Yes, that is my understanding. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Nope, thank you. And then homework and routines, that one of the things that was brought up, and I appreciate the questions that the board has brought up about the distance learning or the online learning, and supporting students in a better way for that. That is something that we want to build in. So teachers will have reminds about resources that are available to students. There will be communication channels that are made available and established at the beginning of the year, and that will follow those routines as we go throughout. And that's really what I want to talk about in these next couple slides, is the lessons learned for when we had to, as Director Johnson said, we just had a few days, right, to cut off our traditional model and try to go into this online. Well, from that time till today, we've been, as a district, really working on improving that system, improving that model. Part of the feedback that we've gotten from the community has been confusion around having so many resources at times, or different resources depending on the age of their students, and trying to manage all of that. So if we could look at the next slide, Talia.
I have a quick question. I'm sorry, John.
Yeah.
So on the schedule slide, it looked like to me it was just Othello High School. It was doing the 4 periods and the 3 periods, the different semesters.
Mm-hmm.
But on that slide, it looks like it's Desert Oasis and Othello High. Can you clarify that part?
I'm sorry. So with the schedule, if is the question that it's with OHS and Desert Oasis?
Yes.
Yeah, I can answer that question. I know that Principal Tovar and his counselor, Priscilla Tovar, they've been engaged in the conversations that when the high school is working through that process. They're certainly more flexible at DOHS. And what I know Principal Tovar is considering is, how does he most closely match what's happening at the high school to support those transitions back and forth between the sites. So I think the experience at DOHS would be very, very similar to the student experience at the high school.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you. Appreciate the questions. So looking at, so going back to the core 4 concepts, what that's really about is, how do you develop a systematic platform to really make concrete and clear how information is delivered, how we communicate, when we reach out to students with new assignments, those sort of pieces. And so trying to find a system where, if we can have from our elementaries through our high schools some common platforms, particularly for parents that have students that are across multiple ages and at different schools, to really try to become more efficient in our communication. This is also going to be a really valuable resource for us in the event if we have to go back to an all online. Maybe it's even for a temporary amount of time, but how do we be able to do that in a way that we can be much more efficient than we were on this initial round? So Talia, if we could look at the next slide, please. When we talk about the core four, we're looking at communication, the instructional videos, instructional platform, and then what we call office hours, or the social emotional connection with our students. And so as a district, what we are looking for, if you will, to adopt as our platform would be using the app of Talking Points, which we started. Some advantages with that is that the teacher could send it out, and then it goes through a translation process to the parents for those that speak a different language. And so to help with that communication around our instructional videos, Screencastify is the tool that we would use, where teachers would record a segment of a lesson. And being asynchronous, or being not having that live, has some advantages. And that's something that we learned through some training with Jeff Utek, and that students can replay it. They could pause it. They could ask a question. They can go back and reference it. And so being able to have those videos available is something that would be part of our model. We have been using Google. We'll continue to use Google as far as Google Classroom, identified where assignments will be had, and then be able to have consistent times with that. So Pete had talked about how it was a real challenge for our students trying to manage 7 different subject areas for the high school. So one, by making the schedule change, you help simplify that. So now they're managing 4 or 3 at a time. And then with Google, if they say every Tuesday at this time, the new assignments will be dropped, right? Having a consistent schedule for students and for parents that are helping their kids out with their schoolwork. And then the last piece is using Zoom, as we are using that tool right now, but for office hours. And what we mean by that is that's a time where students could come and log in and communicate and ask questions to their teacher. So it's not necessarily going to be a live lesson that's being had, but it would be an opportunity to, I'm struggling with this, or I couldn't find this, or just to connect. We had lots of cases in the elementary where they would be reading stories to kids, or different activities that way. But again, it would be a designated time that those teachers would be available for their students. Again, in the event that if we had to go fully online. With all of these resources, they're awesome tools in and of themselves, but they're new, they're different, and people's experience with them varies. And so what we're focusing on this summer around our professional learning opportunities is really around these different components. And so Talia, if we could look at that next slide. This is just an example. This is elementary, but it would be a similar example to for the middle and high school as well, where we would have designated days and they would talk about these specific points. And so it would go over not just the how-to, such as setting up an account or using the different features of those different platforms, but it would also be the content. What should you put on it? Getting ideas from other teachers, really sharing across the district between different schools and their level of success. I've been in the process this last week of reaching out to individuals, staff members across our district that really have built up their expertise in these different areas, so they can share out from real world experience what worked, what didn't work, lessons learned, those sort of pieces. And so that's going to be the training and the focus beginning in August around these different platforms. Questions about the tools or about the professional learning that's going to be happening to support our teachers and staff?
When are you planning on putting out to all staff according to their what grades they teach, what PLs, what opportunities they have?
Yeah, great question. So it will be I'm hoping to be able to get all of our presenters and everything this week. And so next week we'll be able to send that out to all staff with signups. And so a link, they would put down their name so that we have an idea of how many are going to be in attendance. Because of our current health situation that we're in right now, they're going to be done via Zoom. And so we'll split it up so that we don't have so many people that it makes it really cumbersome to have that. And so we'll be cautious of the numbers, and if need to, we could add sessions and those sort of pieces.
Great, thank you.
All right, next slide is really a summary of, I guess, the ask or the plan that we've come together around. Its consideration for opening in a blended model. Grades K-8, the big ticket item is that would be an AM/PM schedule, meeting daily, and that 9-12 would involve an AB schedule, with the understanding that we would be committed to that structure for the entire school year. We also wanted to take the opportunity to say that much of our work has been driven by recommendations from the CDC, the Department of Health, and OSPI safety measures that are shared with us. We would continually reevaluate our programming as conditions change, and I think we're all hopeful improve, and then move towards that least restrictive model as possible. But our current planning and recommendation is to open in the blended model as described.
Hey, Pete, I have a question really quick. I'm not sure if you guys have even thought this far ahead yet or not, but if there's a student who for a medical reason cannot wear a mask, will that student be allowed to still go to school? And same question for a teacher. If they have a medical condition where a mask is not an option for them, will they be denied access to school?
Yeah, I think we certainly take all medical considerations seriously, and we would want to talk through with the family or with the employee about the provider's recommendation for that. Once we work through that hurdle, then we've been in conversations, particularly with Karen Potts, about acceptable models. One of the creative ones she shared with us was a mask or a shield, and the primary concern with the shield was the opening on the bottom. But she indicated that there are folks who have developed just a simple, I guess for lack of a better term, it'd be almost like a sticky note, but it acts as a bib that it's disposable. You hook to the bottom of a face shield, and it just sort of hangs down on your chest, and could be an acceptable alternative that's about at the same standard of protection as a mask. But we absolutely, our expectation is that folks would be wearing masks or an approved alternative. So absolutely, we want to consider those options, and Karen Potts from the Department of Health has been helping us think about that. I know Greg Foltz has been looking at approved alternatives, so we're absolutely considering those things. I think the other thing we have to be mindful of is we certainly want to provide a free and appropriate public education for everyone, but we also have to be mindful of the risk of coming to school without a mask. And what would that mean for that family? Could we provide services in an alternative way if they determined that they couldn't wear one? So not an easy solution on that one, but certainly been thinking about alternatives.
Thank you.
A question that I failed to ask was the way that you're changing the high school teaching teachers periods and all of that kind of stuff. I actually had a couple of different teachers ask this same question: is you're completely changing how they're doing their entire year. Is there an option of starting with a 3 instead of a 4 to just try to get them into it without having it be quite as overwhelming?
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. That could be, I think in educational circles, that's sometimes called a soft approach. It's often what we do with kinders. You know, we start a couple days after school starts, or we open up school softer. So I think it's absolutely something we could consider. It's just the balance of the 3 or the 4. So I just think Dr. Hurst and Talia, we make sure that gets added to the list for consideration, but absolutely something that could work.
Thank you.
No, I appreciate all the work that everybody has been doing on this. I know we've had a lot of questions as board members tonight, and I know some board members has had a lot of questions proposed to us, and we've tried to bring them up tonight. And there's still many, many more out there, I think. And the week to come, and I think especially after this meeting, I think there's going to be many more questions arise from it. So I hope we take a consideration and look at a lot of these questions and get some solutions down in the next couple of weeks before these final decisions have to come back to us. But again, I'm going to stress, I really appreciate all the work that the staff has been putting in on this to try to get this plan in place. And of course, as everybody knows, it could all change in a blink of an eye again too. And my hope is that it changes for the better though, but we'll have to wait to see that when it gets closer when school starts.
Absolutely, Pete. I just want to reiterate what Ken just mentioned. A big thank you to each and every person that was on a committee that had any input into this presentation tonight. In a world that is so insecure, I guess, for lack of a better word, where, like Ken just said, we can have new guidelines out tomorrow, next week. We could have the best plan in place, and we can be told that you got to do something different. I want to commend everybody who has worked on this. Talia, if we can go to the last slide there, I appreciate that's there. My message in conclusion here to this plan is we are OSD, and I want to thank everybody who is a part of OSD. I'm commending Pete and the committee right now, but I know that after tonight, my ask or our ask would be more inclusion to those that feel that they have not participated. I was glad to hear that they're going to have an opportunity. A survey will be sent to them. And I encourage folks to give your input. I know I've been approached as, well, no matter what I say, nobody takes it into consideration. I know that's not the case. I appreciate the full transparency of the process going forward. Pete mentioned everybody will have an opportunity. We do need to come together as a community and know that there is not a silver bullet answer to this. We need to appreciate the efforts that are going on district-wide, the folks that are trying to do the best to accommodate as many folks, as many stakeholders as we can. Pete, I want to thank you very much. Without a doubt, there will be more questions, more stuff thrown your guys' way to tweak this, modify this, perhaps. But I want to thank you all very much because I have been an eyewitness to the early hours and the late nights as I drive by here to cars of district employees putting in, extra hours and working on this. And I just want to thank you for that. So again, kudos. And I hope that when we do put this together and it's approved, it is something that the entire community can come around and support. Even if there's a component to it that perhaps isn't, 100% what I wanted, we need to come together like we have so far as a community to support these things and do our part to help. A lot of times we get selfish and we say, well, I can't because I have an underlying condition. No, because what if I get home and because of me, someone gets, whatever it is. Let's come together. Community of Othello, we are resilient. We will get through this. And again, Pete, thank you very much for the presentation tonight. Okay, something that I apologize because I meant to interject this earlier in our agenda and I didn't. I want to take the time and have Chris introduce Mr. Ed Peterson tonight. He is a person that we have not met yet, or I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, but I do want to give Chris an opportunity to introduce him to the community.
So we just wanted to take this time to introduce our new Director of Communications, Ed Peterson. I know you've heard his name again and again throughout this presentation. To our community and to our board of directors, we do have Ed Peterson on the line. So Ed, we're going to just ask if you could just speak up and just share a few words about yourself.
Sure. Can everybody see and hear me? I had to switch over to my cell phone here a few minutes ago, but can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I think we're all nodding and you can't see us. Yeah.
No, all I can see is Delia's screen still, but really excited to be here, really excited for the opportunity to help do some storytelling within the district about the great work that our staff does, the great work, the innovative work that I think we're going to do next year. Looking forward to jumping into the weeds here with this reentry plan and helping our community really understand what the final plan is and how it's all going to work and having a smooth start, as smooth as we can, to the beginning of school next year. It's going to be an interesting ride, but I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here and use my experience in education and media and public relations to help make a difference and get the word out.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.
Great. Welcome aboard, even though you've been here a few days already, Ed. Hopefully one of these days I'll give you a fist bump or something, or air high five or something, because you got to be careful still. Moving on, also in superintendent informational items, Chris, there is a surplus property. I don't know if that's a presentation or.
Yes, we had a question from one of our board of directors around process for surplus property. We're just going to ask if Jeanette could weigh in on that question.
Yes. So I believe the question was in regards to the property that the board back in March declared surplus. And so following that declaration, we also had a market value appraisal completed, and that was completed in mid-May. So the process for surplus or sale of surplus property, first you need to declare it surplus, let the public know by formal resolution that the property is no longer needed for school use. And then following that, there is a legal advertisement that's posted in the newspaper for 2 consecutive weeks at least, that specifies a date, time, and place that a public hearing will take place to consider the property for sale. So essentially that's saying we're considering selling this property. We want the public to know this, and we want the public to have a chance to say either, yes, we support you selling the property, or, have you considered using it for these other options? So that's kind of the first step. And then having that public hearing, discussing any evidence that was offered and determining whether or not the board would still like to move forward with sale of the property. Then after that decision is made, you would post another legal advertisement in the same newspapers for at least 1 week, notifying the public of the sale of the property. And that's, we're really going to sell this property. That notice would include description of the property, how the bids will be accepted, if it's a formal or non-formal process, those granular details that the public or any bidders would need to know. And then it would also state that the property shall not be conveyed prior to the end of the required 45-day waiting period following the publication of the notice of sale.
Jeanette, can we set a minimum price on our price for sale if we do decide to go out and have it on a bid process?
I believe you can. I will double check on that, but I do know that the RCW for sale of real property does state that there needs to be a 90% threshold of the market value appraisal
And so accepting a bid below that threshold, I believe there's additional requirements essentially, but that 90% threshold would essentially, be the floor of what the district legally could accept, unless there's unless there's other circumstances we need to consider, things like that. But I will verify on a minimum bid if that's allowable, or if if that would be appropriate.
I have a question also. What happens if we decide we want to throw out the appraisal and go with other property nearby that has actually gone for fair market value that's higher than what our appraised number is? Can we set, maybe the question I should ask is, even if it is above that 90% threshold, can we decide not an acceptable bid and throw it out?
So even if the board, accepts bids and things like that, and they do meet the 90% threshold, I don't believe that there's any legal requirement for the board to accept a bid within that group of bids. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
kind of similar to when you're, making a purchase of not necessarily of property, but a purchase of supplies or doing anything like that, of contract work. Just because you solicit bids and you open them does not mean that you have to choose a bid at that time within that group.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I would like to really find out, even if we have to go to the bid process to distribute this land, because if we have somebody that comes in and is willing to pay our minimum price that we set as a board, if we could still go ahead and sell it on those terms, or are we bound by the bidding process on a property? I would like to, like I said, I don't expect that answer tonight, but if we could find out and let us know.
Okay, so essentially, are we required to do a bid process, formal or informal? But are we required to, put it out there, or can we just engage in a one-on-one?
Yes, sell it on
Okay.
the open market
Okay.
at a base minimum price.
Okay.
That's an interesting question, but I don't know if I'm comfortable with doing that without at least going out for bids first, because we are taking care of the taxpayers' property in essence. I say if we didn't get what we consider a fair market value when we go out for bids, then maybe trying that process of an open market as a secondary resort, but not as a primary.
Another option.
And you're on mute.
That's why I asked Jeanette what our options actually are. What process do we have to follow?
Yeah, and that could be a distinction between a formal process and a non-formal process. The formal process could be submit your bids, include all this documentation. We're going to open them on this date at this time in a public meeting, or actually that would be a closed session for sale of property. But that process, or is it we're putting it on the open public market essentially, and so send your bids to this person, and they'll be opened in a timely fashion, or I guess a different process than a normal formal sealed bids opening, where you're opening everything all at once. So I can definitely get the clarification.
Yeah. When do we go about setting our base price?
So I believe that would be after the public hearing with the public, and the final determination whether to sell the property or not. That is still a step that we need to complete. We need to post in a legal newspaper for 2 consecutive weeks, have a public hearing. We'll put that public hearing information in the advertisement. And so once that hearing takes place and the board takes final action to sell or not to sell, then after that decision, it would be appropriate, at that time, based on whatever information I receive on if that's appropriate or not, or legal, then we would have that conversation before we post anything in the newspaper as far as notice of sale and things like that.
Hey, Chris, I just want to ask that whoever you're going to task with this, it sounds like it'll be Jeanette. She bring us as much information as possible based on some of the requests that she's received tonight. I think some of these questions will be answered after she researches this. So Jeanette, based on what you bring back, hopefully, by the next board meeting is sufficient time to have some sort of summary of exactly what the process needs to be. I thank you beforehand for your work in this already. But yeah, research it a bit if you're the designee, and we'll continue this conversation once we have some more clear direction as to what we can or can't do.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, Jen?
I just got a really interesting question that was totally valid about McFarland. I just kind of assumed originally that McFarland was an AB, but then it showed up as an AM PM. But how, if there's 6 schedules for McFarland, and I know this is jumping back into something that we've spent almost 2 hours on already. If McFarland has 6 periods, how can you do AM PM and make that work? Or is there another plan with still being an AM PM, and how can that work?
Yeah, good question. As you know, MMS has been in some transition, and part of the planning for the next school year was a significant change in their schedule. So they had under Jessica's leadership, they had a group of folks gather up and talk about what their schedule was going to look like next year prior to the closure. So they already have a highly functioning group and committee of people thinking about the work. What they were also waiting on was a firm commitment that it was going to in fact be an AM, PM, and an AB structure, because they knew they could fit in either camp. They have determined that their best fit is AM, PM, and so there will be some adjustments to their schedule, but that work is currently being led at the building level. And so Jessica Schenk and her team are in a position, I know they've been working closely with the counselors and other members of their leadership team coming up with a structure there. So they're absolutely on top of that.
Okay, so they're working on it, and we don't have all of the answers yet. Is that what you're telling me?
I'm not comfortable with having all the answers here to share with you. I just know that they've been working on it, and in my conversations with Jessica, that's what they've been doing. I imagine it could be something similar to on one day you might do first, second, and third, and then on your next day you might do 4, 5, 6. That kind of split structure. So sort of a similar experience to what the high school kids are having, but that's what they're working on logistically at McFarland.
Okay, so it sounds like possibly an AM, PM, and an AB mix.
Yeah, whatever structure fits at the school site. So
okay,
it could even be, so you could, since it is in the middle, you could do, I'm going to do first, second, third as a teacher, and then in the afternoon, I'm going to do first, second, third again. And then the next day I might do 4, 5, 6. What happens at the building level that is very, very detailed is how do you maintain teacher prep time. So that level of detail is just it's not available to me this evening.
Okay.
That's the kind of thinking that would be involved in what they produce.
Okay, I see that working for students, but as a teacher, I see them in contact with way more students than any other teacher is in contact with, if that's a potential. Anyways, maybe we can have the specifics for next time come out a little bit more, because if that is the case with both the AM, PM, and the AB, if we were to lose one of those teachers, that, let's say that the teacher is the one that is test positive, that means a huge slew of students, as opposed to at the one of the high schools, it doesn't sound like quite as many students because they're only dealing with 3 or 4 periods as opposed to all 6. I guess is where I'm concerned about.
Yeah, understood. So I guess the question is around providing specific details about the schedule at MMS, but also sharing with the board how we're considering the social distancing and minimizing contact and all of those things. It's also a very similar experience for the dual language kids at Ludwikaga. They have a very similar schedule. So I know Jen Perez and her team have been working really hard on coming up with models. Again, it gets back to that idea about minimizing risk. We're certainly not going to be able to eliminate it, but being as mindful as possible. So we'll be prepared to provide additional details about that for the board.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry I didn't catch it or think about it before.
No, I just want to say, kind of going by what Jen said, and maybe I'm the only person getting this, but because we do our meetings by Zoom, people have access to send me text messages with questions. And so during this meeting, my phone has been blowing up, question after question after question. Of the questions I've asked, only one question has come from a community member / parent. The rest of my questions have come from staff members. So that says to me, you have a whole lot of people working at the district who have no idea what's going on. And so they're asking questions about their schedules, what they're going to be teaching, all of these different facets of their career and what that's going to look like next year. So I'm just getting the overwhelming message that the majority of staff, or maybe it's not the majority, but just the group that keeps contacting myself and other board members, but they don't have any idea what's going on. So from community members, I totally expect that. I welcome it because they're parents and they don't have like any sort of in with the school district, but for the staff to have this many questions, I'm hoping there's some sort of a rollout plan to get this information to them, because they're flooding me, and I'm only speaking for myself, but the majority of the people contacting me, as in 99%, are people who work at the district.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. The rollout plan is certainly something we've thought about. Ed, I know we've talked about engaging with him in the production of these videos. We talked about the communication sessions that we want to start this week. Really what we just need then is a sort of approval from the board. That's my understanding, that OSPI is going to require that the board takes action and approves our reopening plan. So if the communication or the message tonight is, we appreciate all the work, we feel like you have a solid plan, keep going, then we're ready to get rolling. I think we were just waiting for this opportunity to give the board an opportunity to weigh in.
Thank you for clarifying that, Pete. Exactly what Lindsay said is the same for me. I mean, I have had some staff either email me before or contact me during the meeting saying, I have no idea what's going on. And it depends upon which campus they're at, whether they have had a little bit of info or I'm really worried about this or those kinds of things, but it has predominantly been. And you had already said earlier that you were planning on, you wanted first to go to the board to get yeah, we're giving you a soft thumbs up, keep moving forward, and then to completely roll out to them and say, okay, what other questions are there? What else do we need to address? it's obvious that there's been a ton of work done on from all different sides, and we appreciate it, but that is definitely something that I'm seeing more and more, and it looks like Ken Rose's hand as well. It's staff that are staff are really the ones that are the most affected by this.
And I know that everybody has already said it, but I just want to say, you guys are killing it at the district office. Like, I have a headache just from listening to your presentation. I can't imagine making that presentation. Like, I know it's been hours of beating your head against the wall and answering impossible questions and thinking of 50 different scenarios that won't work for one reason or another. So I just want to say, like, I so appreciate all the hard work that you guys are doing, and you can tell you have put so much effort into this, and I think you're doing such a great job. So I just want you to know that.
Yeah, I'll make sure and share that message with the principals, and make sure that they share that with their leadership teams. Certainly been a partnership with OEA and PSC and lots of really caring and compassionate people working on putting the plan together. John and I we were the two guys in the group that were selected to present, so we get to share everyone else's good work, but I'll certainly pass on the message.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete, once again. All right, moving on to item D. We will take a 3-minute recess, and we will go into an executive session for 60 minutes for the purpose of discussing the following. Receive an update on a collective bargain agreement, to consider the selection of a site or the acquisition of real estate by lease or purchase, and to review the performance of a public employee. No action will be taken following the executive session. It is now 9:37. To those that will be involved in the executive session, we will log into that meeting at 9:40. To the community, once again, thank you very much. We appreciate you chiming in tonight, listening, and thank you very much for being concerned, wanting to be informed of where we're headed. We are OSD, we are resilient, and we will get through this. Thank you very much. We will recess here and go into executive session.